Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus, episode 20. I am the show's host, Kyle, and in today's show I'm going to kind of cover current events topics from the last probably week and a half, half week or so. If you remember back to Monday's show, I pretty much only covered Yemen and didn't really get time to talk about current news events from around the rest of the Middle East, so I'm going to catch up on those today, talk a little bit about Syria, Afghanistan, I believe, U.S. Interventionism all over the place, and a cool little Trump story to start. So with that, we are going to get into today's episode. My first story is that Trump gave Merkel a $375 billion invoice for defense services provided by NATO to Germany. Within the NATO alliance, there is, I don't know if it's a contractual or a treaty obligation, but essentially NATO countries are supposed to spend about 2% of their GDP a year, and I guess Germany has been coming in under this. And so this is a theme I have talked about on the show before, just how the U.S. is subsidizing the defense of all these countries overseas, Japan, South Korea, NATO countries, as we'll get into, now adding Montenegro to that list. So because these countries know that they have the full backing and protection of the United States Armed Forces behind them, they could certainly act a little bit more belligerently than they would had they had to just rely on their own defenses. And if they want to act like the way they are, provocative and carrying out wars of imperialism here and there around the world, they would certainly have to spend a lot more of their own GDP and their own taxpayers' money on defense. But because they could do it at the expense of the United States, knowing that, hey, we could act how we want towards Russia, towards North Korea, towards China, Middle Eastern countries, North Africa, etc. Because if it ever does come time that the other country actually wants to go to war with us over our actions, we don't have to worry about our defense because the United States will defend us, right? I don't think there's any doubt in anyone's mind that, let's say, Germany or Ukraine even, no, Ukraine's not NATO, so we'll say Germany, Greece, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, any of these countries decide to pick a fight with NATO or pick a fight with Russia for any reason. It could be silly, just trying to capture some oil fields or something to empower some connected people, or something more serious like somebody actually evil takes over one of those countries. The U.S. is going to defend them. So, if Estonia starts dropping bombs on Russia for no reason or for a crappy reason, or even a good reason, and Russia then invades Estonia, the U.S. is going to send probably most of our military, if not everything it takes, over to Estonia to fight Russia off. And so then Estonia doesn't have to worry about, what am I doing? Is this dangerous? Can I back up my actions with the military that we have in our country? And so it causes kind of a cultural shift in the country too, because the people in the country feel protected, yet they could act out and be provocative around the world. The leaders of the country certainly know this and know that their citizens will feel less backlash from their interventions overseas. So maybe if these countries were, the people in the country were worried about what would happen, then they would have some desire to put some pressure on their government to get their government to back off. But this doesn't happen. And so while Trump giving Merkel this $375 billion invoice was probably just him being childish and stupid, and I really doubt, in as much as I would like to believe that Trump actually has these American first understandings that would lead him to at least do away with American imperialism, then that would be a significantly better direction than our foreign policy has taken under the humanitarian interventionism of Obama or the neoconservatism of George W. Bush. Not only would it be better for America, but be better for people all over the world. However, I don't think we're going to get that out of Trump, but this is that kind of thinking. This is down that line of thinking. And so I think it's at times like this that as non-interventionists need to push the hardest. And, whenever there's a Trump supporter posting this online, you need to say, hey, Trump's got one right here. Let me explain to you why this is so important. And I hope that we're doing that and taking advantage of these opportunities, because they don't come along super often. It is very powerful to try to convince somebody to be coming on your side on an issue and saying, like, your guy is right and here's why, and you might not realize it. It is a much more powerful argument than this is why everything Trump does is stupid and wrong and you're an idiot for following him. So keep that in mind. Hopefully we could see some better outcomes here under Trump, and we could push him to do good things. I saw this story and I was kind of fantasizing that maybe he would take on Pat Buchanan as an advisor one day, so maybe we could hope. Alright, so the next story I would like to talk about is the U.S. the U.S. Senate approving the invitation of Montenegro into NATO. The vote was 97-2. I'm not sure who the abstaining vote was. It might have been Jeff Sessions' now empty seat. Rand Paul and Mike Lee were the only two brave and courageous senators strong enough to take a stand for the American people. This is something that was pushed by the Trump administration, so of course Trump as Hitler gets the full consent of every single sitting Democrat in Congress. It's amazing how they could say everything Trump does is evil, then go out and fully support him when he does something like this. So it's just something to think about. But so we have the Senate approving Montenegro. This means that the U.S. is now responsible for the safety of Montenegro. A country with an army of 2,000 men will now be able to act like a country of 500,000 men because of the force that NATO would put into the country if they were ever attacked or invaded by another country. So this state's certainly going to be able to act and bully its neighbors a lot more, so long as they're not NATO neighbors, and act in ways that they wouldn't have been able to before. So definitely something to keep our eyes on. Definitely not a case where our American senators stood up and cast a vote for the benefit of America or the benefit of the world. I mean, NATO needs to go away, and it's just a disaster at this point. Next, I'd like to talk about the U.S. investigating 3 airstrikes that killed nearly 300 people in Syria and Iraq. I believe the 3 airstrikes are the attack in Mosul that killed up to 240, the attack in Damascus where the U.S., is now storyline seems to be accidentally bombed a church, or the case in Raqqa where the U.S. bombed a school. I'm just going to briefly update you on all of these situations and what I know is going on about them. So the story in Iraq, Mosul, is that the U.S. Carried out a couple of airstrikes on a target that had a lot of civilians in it. This caused at least a building, if not multiple buildings, to collapse, killing up to 240 people inside. I would doubt that we ever get like a full and accurate death toll from this, just because anybody pulling out the bodies is going to have a political motive to either increase or decrease the number. The media has all got air on the side of the government and try to minimize these numbers as much as possible. Also, this is Mosul, Iraq, controlled by ISIS. Who knows who was in that building? There may be some people that get lost under the rubble forever, unfortunately, and hopefully, maybe some relative will miss them, but they certainly won't be counted as a death from this attack. The narrative coming out of the media is that the ISIS had raided this building to explode. That's why it was destroyed by the U.S. airstrike. It wasn't really the fault of the U.S. They were just trying to take out the ISIS guys, but because they had raided this building to explode, it killed all the civilians. However, they completely leave out kind of the narrative that, hey, had the bomb not gone off, the building wouldn't have exploded in the first place. So there's a lot of blame to go around, and certainly if the ISIS guys did raid the building to explode and then the U.S. airstrike set off the explosion, well, they're responsible for that to some extent as well as the U.S. Not everything has to be, there's a good guy and there's a bad guy, and so long as the good guy was trying to kill the bad guys, then whatever the good guys do is okay. Sometimes both sides are pretty terrible and miserable people, and while one side may be better, one side may be worse, the actions of both parties are going to be bad on some given days, and others maybe they're not so bad. But the case here, I think it's pretty clear that the U.S. shouldn't have carried out this airstrike because there's a high risk of civilians' death from the airstrike, but at the same time, ISIS is also responsible because they wired the building to explode. That's if that happened, of course. I haven't seen any proof of this. This is just kind of the mainstream narrative, and it seems to be coming out more of a place of, well, our bomb really shouldn't have knocked over that building so easily, and since it did, we're going to say that maybe ISIS raided the building to explode, so we'll see. But again, I mean, this is, the simplest way to put it is that the U.S. wasn't involved. This blood would not be in any way attributable to the United States of America, but because we are involved, we are dropping bombs, it is. The attack in Damascus, I really covered this last week on Friday, and I don't think there's been any main updates, but what happened was the U.S. Reaper drone went and destroyed a mosque. The Pentagon complained saying that, hey, no, we didn't. We blew up this community center thing where ISIS people were, but in reality what happened was that a new mosque had been built. The Pentagon was either acting on bad intelligence or right now it's just flat out lying as for the reason they carried out the attack. Either way, the U.S. was responsible for 42, at the highest estimate, civilians being killed in that attack. We also have an attack on a school in Raqqa. The Pentagon's initial story to this was that we didn't bomb it, it wasn't us. The story now is we did bomb it, but there weren't civilians inside. Al-Qaeda was inside, or ISIS was inside. What seems to have happened is that this was a school that thankfully wasn't being used as a school. It was being used as a refugee shelter. People were living in here, and then the U.S. carried out an attack on it and unfortunately killed a lot of civilians. I'm sure it was a situation of bad intelligence or maybe bad targeting, whatever. But, they should just come clean and be honest with it. I mean, if you're going to take the moral responsibility of killing people, you should also at least assume the possibility to be honest about when things do happen. I mean, if you want to wield the power to be somebody who gets to, order people be exploded by a bomb overseas in a country where they're really not threatening you, I don't think it's an awful lot to ask, and I don't think it's an impossible moral standard to me to also expect those same people to be honest when the bombs go off in places where they shouldn't. And, if you're being honest and if you want to carry out this policy and you believe in what you're doing, you should at least be honest about it in the way you weigh these decisions and say, yeah, we made a mistake, but this is the price it costs to kill Al-Qaeda or ISIS, is to kill 300 civilians in a week. I think the problem with this, and the reason that you don't get this coming out of the Pentagon or any of these other places, is that Americans would be disgusted. I think, maybe once or twice people would be able to ignore this, but if the media made as big a deal of 30 innocent people being killed overseas as they did being killed in Europe or the U.S., then I think the attacks would probably stop pretty quickly, and that the U.S. people would demand that their troops come home. So just some thoughts on that whole story. We have the U.S. sending more troops to Mosul right now, I believe. I didn't know the numbers originally, and then I saw a report that said between 200 and 300 paratroopers was headed to Mosul, so I'm assuming that those two stories are tied together, and it's 200 or 300 new additional troops in Mosul. This puts America well over the $5,000 cap imposed on the U.S., either by executive order, Pentagon order, or Congress. I forget which one. So 6,000 U.S. troops at least. Who knows how many thousands of contractors paid for by the United States right now operating in Iraq. We are in war in Iraq. This is a mess. As I was talking about before with all the civilian casualties, I've seen reports that 3,500 civilians had died before the reports of the most recent 240 had been killed in Mosul. So it's a bloodbath over there, and the U.S. and the Trump administration is only getting ourselves more and more involved instead of trying to get away from this terrible campaign. There are still 400,000 civilians estimated to be trapped in West Mosul, so if you think that the worst of it's over, I really don't. I think it's only going to get worse, and that we need to be very careful and start to, tell our politicians, hey, you got to watch these death counts, because Trump is turning all kinds of power over to the Pentagon and CIA and allowing looser regulations on these air attacks. And if the United States, if the Senate or the Congress doesn't stand up and at least put some pressure on the administration, then they're just going to keep doing more and more of this, and it's just going to be more blood spilled needlessly. Now I'd like to turn our attention and talk about just a few stories coming out of the Middle East. We have the request from the U.S. commander in Afghanistan to get 5,000 more troops to break the stalemate in that country. I kind of got a feeling that this is the direction the Trump administration is going on Afghanistan, that they're going to put a few thousand more troops in that country and really try at their very best to put a group other than the Taliban in power in that country. I don't know to what extent that the mission will be successful, but long term it's not going to be. It'll be the same thing with the Bush intervention, the Obama surge, and now the Trump surge. We'll put a whole bunch of more troops in. They'll die trying to fight in the mountains and clean up the Taliban and ISIS. In the end, those guys may go away for a year, but as soon as you have troops withdraw, they will come back and they will fight for their country again. So Trump, if you're smart, stop wasting American money there and go home, please. Moving to Syria, one thing that Assad did say recently was that he threatened to launch some Scud missiles at Israel if Israel continued to carry out airstrikes in Syria. I'm sure quite a bit of this is saber-rattling, just like you had Lieberman, who was, I believe, the defense minister of Israel, telling Assad that if they shot more missiles at Israeli planes bombing in Syria, that they would destroy and target Syria's anti-aircraft weaponry. I doubt either of these things will happen. I'm assuming that Assad knows that he has bigger problems, ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, to pick a fight with Israel. I would hope Israel isn't dumb enough to start attacking the Assad government, because if the Assad government loses, Al-Qaeda or ISIS is going to rule Syria. I mean, it seems very obvious to this observer that if any fighting did break out between Syria and Israel, the only winner is going to be Al-Qaeda and ISIS, everyone. So hopefully, I know I'm counting on a lot to say I hope political leaders are going to make the right decisions, but I think it's pretty clear in this case that the right decision is for Assad and Netanyahu to not attack each other. Syrian forces seized an air base near Raqqa. Apparently this was a pretty important base. Some U.S. airstrikes and I believe some U.S. troops are actually involved in this mission, or they're involved in the mission to liberate a dam from ISIS. So we have this going on. Kurds continue to make progress against Assad, or not against ISIS in Raqqa. We also have the U.S. announcing that U.S. troops will be in Libya for this foreseeable future. This is significant just because we've been in that war for quite a few years, and we're just kind of saying we're going to be there for the long run at this point. I'm hoping that eventually the U.S. gets smart and pulls out, but I also think that we had to worry about Libya possibly being kind of this next Syria-style proxy war between Russia and the U.S., where we're not really fighting each other, but we're on opposing sides who are also opposing a ISIS-type third party. So you have the U.S. fighting for one government, the Russians fighting for another government, both governments fighting against ISIS and kind of fighting against each other. And so I don't know if you could really call that a proxy war, and I wouldn't like to call that a proxy war just because I don't want to feed into this Cold War rhetoric. However, this is a concern we have to have for Libya. So if you're somebody who likes peace and not wasting money, then I suggest you advocate with me in that we should take our troops home from Syria, or Libya. Excuse me. Alright, I also want to cover this story about U.S. troops starting to wear black uniforms to look more like Iraqi counterterrorism forces in Iraq. I just found this story to be interesting because maybe this is the way the U.S. government is going to try to embed more U.S. troops in with the front lines in Iraq. Without maybe so much media attention and things like that getting involved. So once again, not a huge story, but just something to keep our eyes on. And then I'd like to wrap up today's show by talking about the U.S. boycotting nuclear disarmament talks at the UN. I guess, first of all, once again, the hell are we paying Nikki Haley for at this point? She's not talking to North Korea. She's not talking about reducing nuclear weapons. Apparently her sole job in the UN is to tell Iran and Russia that we're putting more sanctions on them, and to be honest, we could do that by sending a memo. So let's fire Nikki Haley and save the government a couple $100,000 a year, and while we're at it, we could just withdraw from the UN and not pay them $10 billion a year. Wouldn't that be nice? But on the larger issue of nuclear weapons, this is obviously what the world should be striving for. These are weapons of extinction. I'm not going to sit here and argue with anybody the mutually assured destruction argument, or that, the U.S. needs weapons because if the U.S. has them, then doesn't have them, then Russia will attack the U.S. Fine, whatever, you could agree with that. But at the end of the day, I think we should all just want less nuclear weapons in the world. They're dangerous. If anybody were to start a nuclear war, it pretty much mean the death of billions of people. Even a few nuclear bombs going off in a conflict between India and Pakistan would certainly kill probably billions of people in the world. So if you're somebody who doesn't like genocide, consider supporting nuclear disarmament. Alright, everybody, that's going to do it for my show today. I hope you liked this show. This was a little bit shorter than I like to do, but I just pretty much went through the new current events for y'all. If you like what I'm doing, check out my news roundups at kylesfilesblog.com or libertarianinstitute.org. Scott Horton runs a real cool site there. I highly recommend you check that out. Check out the Facebook group, Foreign Policy Focus. Go to iTunes and give me a 5-star rating and review. I'm on Twitter at KYAAALE. And the page for the Foreign Policy Focus podcast is lib.syn.foreignpolicyfocus. Thanks, everybody. Have a good week.